what would it be like to see your own unconscious mind mirrored in the physical movements of a robot?
Dobar dan, robote Nao.
Dobar dan.
Da li možeš da se predstaviš novinarima?
Ja sam Nao. Autonomni program i humanoid razvijen u kompaniji Aldebaran Robotics.
What would it be like to sort of have you yourself judged or analyzed or reacted upon by a robot?
The dominant view in cognitive science today is that the mind is an information processing system. The processes are explainable in mechanistic terms. But what does that in fact mean? Some think that, as in the case of a computer, where the hardware provides a substrate on which software runs, we can understand our brain as providing a substrate on which computational processes run. These processes then give rise to behavior, thought, perception, and other mental phenomena. We will see, however, that the relation between mechanism and cognitive phenomena is not by any means clear. Cognitive science is an interdisciplinary endeavor. A number of different fields have been involved over the last decades in the refining and further development of the basic ideas. We will see how the different developments have led to new conceptions of what cognition is and how we should approach an understanding of mental phenomena. Let us begin the same way cognitive science began, with a discipline called artificial intelligence. The year 1956 can be considered the year of its birth. In this year, researchers from computer science, linguistics, and psychology came together for a conference at Dartmouth College. The central aim of those scientists was to create an artificial agent that was comparable to humans in its mental capacities. And the most crucial mental capacity was believed to be intelligence, which was defined as the ability to solve problems that are highly structured, deterministic, and require great amounts of calculation.
Artificial intelligence didn't work very well in the old days. We didn't have enough storage and enough processing power to do anything interesting. And so we tended to design systems that were rule-based because we had enough memory to write down a series of rules. So if you get this input, then you do that. If you think about this, you do that. But we didn't have enough data to really do an analysis. Does that make sense? Is that really how it should be processed? Now with these enormous amounts of storage, we can use advanced machine learning techniques to really understand the underlying data in a way we couldn't do before. So a great example of this is machine translation. The old machine translation systems were all rule-based. And they were awful. It was a parlor game, right? You put something in and you see how funny it is coming out the other end. Or even better, you put in a sentence, you translate it to Italian, and you translate back to English, and everybody just laughs hysterically, right? Now, the Bing Translate system that comes out of my organization, Microsoft Research, or the Google translation software that's out there, we do a really good job. It's not perfect. It's still way worse than a really good human translator could do. But it's good enough that people actually can solve problems with it. You can read articles in other languages. You can read, for example, Microsoft automatically translates all of its knowledge base into other languages for people to use, because all of our knowledge base articles, which are articles to help our customers, are written in English. And yet, if a Japanese customer wants to use the knowledge article, he can now, because it will be automatically translated into Japanese. And our studies show that automatic translation of those knowledge base articles produces just as good a result for that consumer as the English article does for the English consumer. That they solve their problem just as quickly using that knowledge, and they're just as satisfied as the English consumer of the English data. So we're building machine translation systems now that are useful, right, that really solve problems, that do things for people. And that's because we have enormous amounts of data, and we can do machine learning against that. We could not have done that 10 years ago.
Let's take a closer look at the example of playing chess. For humans, it can be very demanding to find an optimal move, because many possible consequences need to be considered ahead. Will I lose any of my figures? Can I lure my opponent into a trap? And ultimately, how can I win the game? Professional chess players are not only experienced with certain situations, but are also able to think many more moves ahead than others, which is why an average player doesn't stand a chance against a professional one. The chess example nicely illustrates the fundamental principles of AI. Playing chess or solving any kind of structured and deterministic problem is nothing more than searching for the optimal solution by going through every possible action and its consequences. One of the first and well-known approaches to these kinds of problems is the general problem solver, which, simply put, works like this. First, the problem has to be stated formally as states, operations, and goal states. It is relatively easy to give a formal description of chess. The current state describes the position of the figures on the board. Afterwards, all the rules of the game and every possible move must be translated into operations. The goal state is a state in which the opponent loses his king or can't move it anymore. Checkmate. Second, a solution is computed by consecutively applying operations to the current state until a sequence is found that results in the goal state. This procedure is called search. When the computer has to decide which move to make, it can go through every possible move, compute its consequences, and choose the optimal move to get closer to the goal state. By applying this brute force search method, IBM's Deep Blue was the first computer that managed to beat the world's best chess player in 1997. Nowadays, chess programs even run on personal computers, and it is taken for granted that they can beat all human opponents. Modern programs, however, have been further developed and include heuristics. Instead of computing all possible moves and their consequences, as in the brute force method, heuristics help to approximate certain solutions in order to decrease computational costs. Still, the basic search idea remains. It is obvious why a computer will always be able to beat a human in chess. In principle, it can go through all possible moves and their consequences in order to find the optimal solution. Compared to a computer, a human player essentially lacks two things: the computational power to predict all consequences, and the memory capacity to store the huge amount of information. Although computer scientists manage to develop computers which are far better than humans in solving structured and deterministic problems, we still don't have a computer that we are willing to call cognitive. Now, why is that? It seems that cognitive capacities comprise more than just deterministic problem solving. When cognitive science first emerged, the view on cognition was much narrower than it is today. It was believed that the human brain pretty much functioned like a computer. The brain was believed to be nothing more than a symbol processing machine. The analogy between a computer and the human mind is known as the computer model of the mind. The processing of information and the search for solutions to problems were considered central cognitive capacities. This computer model view was and still is very dominant. Psychologists, for instance, talk about long-term and working memory to explain how human memory works, a model which is closely linked to computer science. But the view on cognition has begun to change. Most cognitive scientists nowadays believe that cognition includes all kinds of human abilities, such as painting a picture, playing the guitar, communicating, and even more basic abilities, some of which all animals share, like recognizing objects, as well as orienting and moving in one's environment. Extending the focus to so many human capabilities, however, poses a challenge to the field of AI, because what had been understood as intelligence, namely the solving of structured and deterministic problems, does not seem sufficient for the creation of a general artificial agent that is comparable to humans in its cognitive capacities. With the shift of focus to other human abilities, understanding cognition became more complex. New approaches in the field of artificial intelligence were developed, and new disciplines emerged which tackled the phenomenon of cognition from different angles. One of these new approaches is that of artificial neural networks. The principle of this line of research is radically different from the example we heard before. It does not make an attempt to explain complex cognitive phenomena or parts of these phenomena directly. Rather, it starts by modeling very basic functional elements and their interconnections. Cognition is assumed to be a feature of living beings that emerges from a sufficiently complex organization of these basic elements. In living beings, we have identified the brain as the essential structure from which cognitive processes emerge. We make the assumption that the basic structural elements of the brain are important for cognition. These are our neurons. Trying to understand how these cells work, one needs to look not at single neurons in isolation, but at a large number of them and their interconnections. Researchers in artificial neural networks have found out that the number and strength of these interconnections is of utmost importance for any kind of processing. In order to understand how the interconnections give rise to processing capability, they simulate the behavior of networks of neurons by building artificial models of them. This feature of being able to cope with both kinds of uncertainty is a fundamental difference to classical AI techniques, and makes neural networks also very appealing in the fields of image recognition and robotics, about which we'll talk later. Additionally to the advantages mentioned before, the structure of our networks is often designed to be as biologically plausible as possible. Therefore, we have grounds to assume that the processes that are taking place in the network are actually similar to what happens in the brain. Therefore, we can see that research in artificial neural networks has a large variety of applications. One such example is the use of networks to control a robotic arm. Modern robot arms are constructed with artificial muscles that need precise activations for any given position of the arm. One can use neural networks in this case to learn an association of the desired position of the arm to the parameters of the respective muscles. This can be done with neural networks without knowing oneself explicitly how to control the arm. As you can imagine, this is already a very complex task. Now imagine the robotic arm needs to catch a ball. This addition of perception complicates things considerably and leads us to the field of robotics, which concerns itself with exactly these problems of action and perception. Moving around is one of the most fundamental skills that we humans have. For us, movement appears very easy because we're doing it most of our waking life. Executing bodily movements is, however, a task of great complexity, involving the fine-tuned control of hundreds of muscles, which all need to work together to execute a movement and to remain balanced. Also, our movements must be goal-directed and continuously adapted to the environment. To achieve this simultaneous and precise control is one of the main goals of robotics. Indeed, movement that is fine-tuned to the environment is a very complex task, and can be considered as one of our cognitive abilities. But what exactly makes it such a hard task? Certainly, for meaningful interaction with the environment, we must first perceive and understand our surroundings. The perception and the interpretation of the environment are abilities which are extremely hard to model in an artificial system. The robotics approach faces two problems when trying to make sense of the environment. Firstly, even for the most advanced computational vision algorithms, it is hard to extract meaningful information from arbitrary images. For example, there is not yet any algorithm capable of correctly identifying all chairs in this picture, a task that is trivial for us human observers. Secondly, in a normal context, responses must be exceptionally fast, if not immediate. Therefore, a robot will often not have the time to apply the complex state-of-the-art algorithms which have some hope of identifying the chairs. With the aid of this example, we can see that cognitive abilities can rarely be examined in isolation, because there is always mutual interaction. In order to move, we need to recognize and interpret our environment. In order to recognize and interpret our environment, we need to move. Let's come back to our example of the chair image. It is easier for us human observers to understand its contents because we immediately recognize objects that are relevant to our actions. In this manner, we see immediately that the chair right at the back of the room is only a painting, that the chair on the desk is a miniature, and so on. We can do this because, through experience, we understand how the perceived object sizes change as we move our viewpoint. Remember what we have heard so far about the crucial role the environment plays in certain cognitive tasks? Some researchers even go one step further by claiming that every single cognitive ability depends on the fact that we do have a body with which we move in the environment. We are not born intrinsically able to understand our senses, nor coordinate our body in a goal-directed manner. It is only by moving and acting in the world that we can acquire it. Researchers typically conceive of the processes that lead to perception as belonging to two distinct groups. The first comprises the so-called bottom-up processes, in which the raw sensory data is propagated to brain areas associated with higher cognitive function, becoming ever more abstract and general. Processes from the second group go in exactly the opposite direction, where abstract processes influence and control the behavior of the lower sensory areas. For example, new sensory information leads in a bottom-up fashion to the formation of memory. Likewise, in a top-down fashion, memories of past experiences profoundly influence one's immediate perception. Despite modern advances, we still have nothing close to a robot that can move over a crowded street without being run over. If we had such a system, we might consider calling it cognitive. But even if we would grant such an artificial system cognition for this, humans are capable of much, much more. A simple example would be the immediate recognition of the faces of friends while crossing the road. Therefore, basic human abilities like perception and object recognition still need to be understood to a much greater degree. Recognizing and categorizing objects is an essential part of our visual experience. In our everyday life, we identify objects all the time without being aware of it. Imagine you are strolling over the market in search of tasty strawberries. You are bombarded with sensory information, the smell of fresh oranges and strawberries mixed with the smell of fish from the market stall nearby, the voices of sellers and buyers, the bright colors of the fresh fruits and vegetables, as well as the visual impressions of the people walking by. Amazingly, your brain is able to deal with the abundance of information reaching your senses. It differentiates between the important and the unimportant input. You can easily recognize strawberries among all the other things in your environment. How does that work? Neuroscientists approach this question by investigating the brain mechanisms that are active when we perceive the world. It has been found that the process of visual perception is greatly influenced by our memory. So, does infinite storage capacity mean that we can remember literally everything? Let's test this. How many digits can you memorize? You can see that the brain's storage capacity is not infinite with respect to arbitrary information. On the contrary, when forming memory, only those stimuli that are considered relevant have a chance of being stored for longer periods of time. This ability of the brain to be selective about what information is processed makes it such a wondrously efficient and capable organ. Let's come back to the strawberries again. You can smell them and simultaneously see their red color and shape. The visual information coming through your eyes and the smell reaching the brain through your nose are processed in different brain regions. But still, these separate impressions are integrated and processed together. You pay attention to the strawberries and all relevant information, in this case all information about the strawberries, is integrated. So, if we pay attention to an object, all its features are bound together and we perceive a coherent object. However, during this process of synchronization, errors can occur. This is the case in diseases such as schizophrenia. With the help of single-cell recordings, EEG, MEG, and fMRI, neuroscientists conduct experiments designed to probe specific brain functions. It is not only metaphors and irony which pose problems for the computer. There are plenty of other aspects in natural language which resist attempts to formalize. First of all, human speakers use language in a creative manner, with frequent changes in meaning and use. Ask your grandmother what the word cool means, and then ask your younger sister what she considers cool. Moreover, understanding requires background knowledge about the world. We need to know who Mozart was in order to understand this utterance. Finally, language is highly context-dependent and ambiguous. It is not just words that can be ambiguous, but also entire statements. In order to resolve such ambiguities, we need to know how language is used in particular situations. This requires not only linguistic knowledge, but also knowledge about the world. Since human language cannot be formalized like a computer program, a computer is not able to treat natural language the same way as artificial languages. Current computers cannot properly understand natural language. This can be seen in Siri, the speech interpretation and recognition interface of the iPhone. Siri is capable of language production and recognition, but is there also language comprehension involved? Even if comprehension is missing, a computer is capable of speech recognition. How is this possible? Now the computer processes the extracted text. Siri uses an online search engine for this. A search engine returns the appropriate result for our search request, though of course the machine doesn't understand what cognitive science means. So the machine cannot tell us. But who can?